So good evening, everybody. My name is Leslie Kay. I am from Modesto, California, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date is May 4th, 1992, and my home group is the Principals Study Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor. My sponsor knows where I am tonight. My sponsor also knows who I am, which I think is really, really important. I have a relationship with that woman today that has been going on for over 20 years. And she is an intricate part of my sobriety. She also has a sponsor. That sponsor has a sponsor. And we come from a strong sponsorship pocket of enthusiasm. One of my sister sponsees is here tonight, Denise. I've known Denise since I was in my first year of continuous sobriety, and now we actually share a sponsor together. So I tell you all of this because if you are newer than I am in this program, one of the things that's become really apparent to me is that every single thing that I was taught or told or suggested or pointed in a direction of when I was new in AA, none of those things hurt me, and all of those things are important for newcomers to do today. Now, what I was told when I first got here, I didn't always hear. I walked into the back doors of the Concord Fellowship around 1989, maybe the beginning of 1990. There were Christmas decorations on the table, but it was the Concord Fellowship, so it very well could have been July. I have no idea. But what I will tell you is that I weighed about 300 pounds. I sweated vodka, and my hair was different colors, and it was not as a fashion statement. It was different colors because I was trying to be a blonde, and when you put hair color on your hair and it's so full of alcohol, all kinds of interesting things will happen. I was this close to losing my job, and that wouldn't be that big a deal, except that I was employed as a civil servant. And it's really difficult to lose a civil service job. But by golly, I was this close to losing it. And I came into AA simply because other people had about had it with the way that I was living my life and the way that I was drinking. I was fine with it. I didn't think there was anything to be worried about. I often tell people that when I first walked into AA and I saw those window shades hanging on the wall, one of which had 12 steps on it, I thought the first step was I was powerless over alcohol and my mother had become unmanageable, because it was really her bitch that got me walking into my first meeting of AA. And I remember distinctly looking around the rooms at the Concord Fellowship, and my very first thought was, I don't belong here. This must be the Hells Angels chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am a nice girl from the suburbs. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. I graduated from UC Berkeley. I was in a sorority. I don't belong here. These are people that I used to hang out with when I was running hard, living in Los Angeles and trying to be an artist. But I got away from all that. I've straightened my life up. I'm a young widow. I'm all these things. I don't belong here. And I am so grateful that the people in that room did not treat me like I didn't belong. They welcomed me in, and they didn't rush at me either. They didn't run at me and hand me phone numbers or books or any of that stuff. It was, come on in, kid. Hey, there's coffee over there. We're gonna start a meeting. If you want to sit over there, it's great to see you. If you want to hang out afterwards, we'll talk to you after the meeting. And that was my introduction to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wish I could tell you that walking into the back room of the Concord Fellowship through the back door, that the birds started singing and the angels came out. And from that moment on, I never picked up another drink of alcohol. And that is just not my story. As you heard me say, my sobriety date did not hit until 1992. Now, I thought during the time that I was here that I was doing the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. because this is what I heard you say. What I heard you say was, you put the plug in the jug. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't drink between meetings and you'll be fine. And that's what I heard. That's what I thought the program of Alcoholics Anonymous was. And that's what I kept trying to do. I would put the plug in the jug. I'd start going to meetings. Look at me, I'm going to meetings. I'm going to 2-3 meetings a day. I'm going to meetings at 6 a.m. I'm going to meetings at noon. I'm going to meetings after work. I'm being a good little girl and I am not drinking between meetings. And that would work sometimes 10, maybe 15 whole days. And I could get maybe 15 whole days of continuous sobriety. And then something would happen and I would get struck drunk. And I didn't mean to, I didn't plan on it. I would just be hit with that one moment of insanity. And the only thing that I ever did right during this entire period was that I kept coming back to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I kept hearing the same thing again and again. Put the plug in the jug, go to 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't drink between meetings. You'll be fine. And I decided after a short period of time that it must be the problem. The problem had to be the Concord Fellowship. So I started going to other meetings around the area while I was in the Bay Area of California. And I started going to meetings in Walnut Creek. And I started going to meetings in Lafayette. And I started going to meetings in Danville. And I started going to meetings in San Ramon. And I started going to meetings in Pleasant Hill. And I started going to meetings in Orinda. I started going to meetings in Berkeley. I started going to meetings other places than the Concord Fellowship. And I swear I kept hearing the same message of AA. And that message I kept trying to do it. And it didn't work. And the miracle during this 2-year period is that the fact that I just kept trying was an absolute miracle. And one day I decided, for whatever reason, to go to a meeting at a place called the Concord Originals. Now, I have to explain to you how someone like me at that time goes to a meeting. If the meeting is going to start at 8 o'clock, I walk in at about 7:58. And I kind of slink in the back door and I lean against that back wall and I try to get behind the wallpaper so that none of you will see me. And then I sit down and then the meeting starts. And then for the whole meeting, I am up and I'm getting coffee and I'm going back and I'm sitting down and I'm up and I'm going outside and I'm having a cigarette and I'm coming back in and I'm sitting down, I'm up and I'm walking around, I'm going to bar coffee and then suddenly the meeting's over and I walk up to the front, I grab hands, we sing, we chant, and I walk out and you see my headlights out of the parking lot. And that's how I attend meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's no wonder that that's the message I kept hearing. But for some reason, when I got there that night, there was only one place open for me to sit. And that was in front of this mean old alcoholic man. You know the kind. They've been sober for 300 or 400 years. And they're sitting in meetings going, hey, get a book, get a sponsor. Hey, you know those guys, right? And this guy was called Fast Eddie. And everybody in this meeting adored Fast Eddie. If Fast Eddie said that the sky was blue, people lost their minds. Oh my God, did you hear what he just said? The sky is blue. That is so spiritual. And I didn't particularly like him, but there was no other place for me to sit but right back in front of Fast Eddie. So I sat down and they did, at that meeting, they asked if there was anybody there in their first 30 days of continuous sobriety. And I raised my hand one more time. My name is Leslie, and I'm back. And I waited for everybody to go, oh, we're so glad you're here, Bougie, because I knew that that's what they were going to do. That's what they always did at these meetings. And before they could do that, Eddie looked at me and he yelled at me. Now, I have actually been in meetings with people that were there that day, and I have heard them tell me that he didn't yell at me because he was dying of emphysema at the time and was on oxygen, and it wasn't physically possible for him to yell. But I remember yelling. And what I remember him doing is saying, aren't you goddamn tired of always saying you're in your first 30 days of sobriety? Because I'm goddamn tired of listening to you say it. And the only thing I had learned in 2 years of Alcoholics Anonymous just popped out of my mouth. I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "You're supposed to love me until I can love myself." And he said, "I don't love you." He goes, "I don't even like you very much." He says, "You've been coming in here for 2 years. Whine, whine, whine." He says, "You whine about your dead husband, you whine about your dead baby, and you whine about your parents getting divorced when you were 6. When are you going to come in here and say, 'I want to quit drinking and I don't know how. Somebody help me'?" You know, something happened to me in that moment, because in that actual moment, I had been raised primarily with my mother's family. My mother's family are Italian immigrants. They got here at the turn of the last century. The men and women that I was raised with on the ranch, English was the second language. We are loud, we are loving, we are passionate, and we are a lot of fun. But my father's family are Scots-Irish from the South. This man is Texas, Alabama, Georgia. These are those people. And at the moment that this man yelled at me, what I will tell you is 10,000 years of Irish ancestry rose up in front of me. And I spent the next about 60 days going to every meeting I could find that person at and staying sober right at him. I would just walk in and I would look for the room. I'd see him. I'd go sit right opposite him and just go, "What do you think of that? I'm sober." And it was the anger. He made me so mad, and anger carried me through until about, I don't know, mid-50, maybe 60 days of sobriety. And at 60 days of continuous sobriety, what I had was I was sober. I was physically sober. I was as physically sober as I am right now at 31 plus years. I was physically sober, and I was not all right. You people had been lying to me, because I don't know about the rest of you, but when it's just me, just Leslie, and I'm physically sober, I'm telling you, I got to know where all the exits and entrances are. Colors are way too bright and sounds are way too loud. And everybody seems to be coming at you with ideas. "Yeah, you want to do this, you want to do that. You should read the book, you should do this. Live and let live, one day at a time, get into service." And it felt like just everything was just coming at me. And for the first time in my life, what I wanted to do is I wanted to die. I wanted to die. I had been through some really tough things during my drinking adventures, as the big book calls them. And I had never wanted to kill myself, but I wanted to then, and I was stone cold sober. And the difference is that I wasn't the only one that wanted to die. I also wanted some of you to die. And I knew who you were, and I knew where you went to meetings. And so I decided that night that what I was going to do was I was going to drive my car, which was a 1987 Chevy Impala, 4-door, rusty top, hole in the muffler. It was a great, great car. And I was going to drive it up the front stairs of the Concord Fellowship, into the Concord Fellowship. I was going to take as many people out as I possibly could, and I was going to hope for a big giant explosion. I wanted to hit the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. I wanted people to be interviewed on the street out in front of my mother's house, where we didn't know she was that type of person. I just wanted to make that kind of impression. That's how mad I was. That's how angry I was. And that's how much I did not want to live. And for whatever reason, I couldn't turn my car around the corner fast enough. So I just parked it. And I walked into the rooms that night. God put my first AA sponsor in the room that I was in. And it was a guy that we used to call Cajun Kenny. And Kenny had been sober for about 4 or 5 years at that time. And he had first gotten sober at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. And so he wasn't really impressed with the sorority girl gone bad. And he was the only one that was willing to come up and talk to me. And he walked right up to me and he said, "What is wrong with you?" And I told him, "I don't understand anymore. I try to stay sober. I'm going to drink and that and Daddy is, yeah. And I don't understand it." And he was like, whoa, come with me. And he took me outside, rummaged around in his truck, and he pulled out a cassette tape. And he said, "I want you to go home and I want you to listen to this man. This is a tape of my sponsor. And if you still feel like killing people after you've heard this man speak, then I want you to call me, because there are people at this fellowship I don't like, and I will help you. And that seemed reasonable to me. And so I took the tape and I went home and I put it in, and the magic that is Alcoholics Anonymous happened for me that night. And it's real important for me to share this with people, because a lot of times I hear today in meetings of AA that people don't relate to other people in AA. And I'm going to tell you that the person that turned the light on for me, the man that was on that tape, he and I have absolutely nothing in common. Not only is he a different gender than I am, everything about him is different. Different background, different educational level, different life experiences, different age group. Everything about this man is different, different religious experiences. Everything about this guy was different from me. This guy was a real life gangster when he was out there. I mean, like Lincoln Continental sharkskin suit driving gangsters in Kansas City kind of guy. And he had been in a maximum security prison. I had driven by those, but none of his experiences were my experiences, except he said that every single time somebody said to him, your problem is drugs and alcohol, he always wanted to grab them around the throat and say, don't you get it? My problem is not drugs and alcohol. My problem is I don't have any drugs and alcohol right now. And the light went on. Bam. You know, I'm very much a late bloomer when it comes to drinking. You know, Steve shared that he started as a very young teenager, not me. I didn't have my first drink until I was 17 years old, which means that I came to drinking with 17 years of continuous sobriety. And I'll never forget the day that I was asked by two of the cool girls in my high school to go off-campus lunch with them. I was so excited. I mean, these were the really cool girls, and that was something I wasn't. I was like your resident nerd. I was in all the plays, and I was in the, you know, the National Honor Society, and I was the straight A student, and I was this and that, but I was just a complete and total social nerd. And the cool girls asked me out. And I didn't realize it until many years later that it was because I was the one that had a car. But it doesn't matter. We drove off campus lunch. And I remember we got to this park, and one of those girls pulled out a bottle of Southern Comfort. And every fiber of my being, I wanted to yell, no, we are not supposed to do that. That is wrong. We're going to get in trouble. We are underage. That is illegal. And instead, all those words just stuck in my throat. And the bottle got to me. And I made a choice at that moment. And that choice was the cool girls, not integrity, not my morals, not every way I'd been raised. And I grabbed that bottle and I took a swig. And that stuff went down my throat and it hit my stomach and it went. And all of a sudden I could take a deep breath. And I didn't know that what had just happened to me was an abnormal reaction to the drug ethyl alcohol. All I knew is that that came around again and I needed another one. And I grabbed it and I took another drink. And by the second drink, not only had my shoulders come off my ears and I could take a deep breath, but you know, all those worries I had about not being a cool girl, they were gone. Those two were lucky to be in a car with me. In fact, the whole world would have been lucky to have been in that car with me. And by the time it got to me, by the third drink, it is Katie bar the door. And I don't know that what has happened to me is something that only happens to 10 or 12% of the population. That what has happened to me is an abnormal reaction to the drug ethyl alcohol. All I know is that the solution to that feeling I had of being unwanted, unloved, unnecessary, just somebody that was to be disregarded, I found the answer, and it came in that bottle. And for the next many years, I chased exactly that. And when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I am not one of those people where alcohol had stopped working. It always did that for me. Whenever I took a drink, it got my shoulders to relax. It allowed me to take that deep breath. Now, other things happened too. And what I didn't know was that I had also flipped a switch, and that I would drink until my brainstem became saturated, and I would go into a blackout, and I would come to in another state underneath people I'd never met before, trying to figure out where I was by looking at paper in a desk drawer or a street sign out of a window. I didn't know that that was a result of a obsession to drink and an allergy of the body. All I knew was that when I stayed sober for too long, I got restless, I got irritable, and I got discontent. And so I heard that man that night. I heard him say that that's what happened to him. And I heard him say that what happened to him was something called alcoholism. And I heard him say that the program of Alcoholics Anonymous gave us an answer to exactly that would allow him for many, many years to stay physically sober and comfortable in his own skin. And I grabbed the phone and I called Kenny. And I said, "You are not going to believe this, but I think I'm an alcoholic." And he said, "How long have you been coming to meetings?" And I said, "About 2 years." He says, "Well, you are a quick study." And I asked him what is probably the most important question I've ever asked anybody in AA. I said, "Would you be my sponsor? Because this guy on the tape said I need to get a sponsor. Would you do that for me? Would you be my sponsor?" And I wasn't even sure what a sponsor was. For all I know, he was going to hand me a baseball cap with his name on it. I was going to have to wear it everywhere. I didn't know. And he said, "I will, but," and he outlined a program of sponsorship for me that, believe it or not, is pretty much the same program of sponsorship that I have today. He said to me, "We are going to work out of the big book, and we are going to work out of the 12 and 12. Says you are going to take the steps one at a time, and you are going to learn about the traditions one at a time. You're going to get yourself a sobriety date. You're going to hold on to it like a biting sow." He says, "You're going to get service commitments. You're going to go where I go, and you're going to do what I do. And if at any time you think you got a better idea, that's all right. There's the door. You're going to get yourself a new sponsor. No harm, no foul." And the second big miracle of my life happened because I said, "Okay." And I wish that I could say to anybody who is newer than I am, that from that moment, from the moment I entered Alcoholics Anonymous, which was at that moment, and started working with a sponsor and following directions and reading that literature and taking those steps and learning about those traditions and becoming involved, that what happened is my life just became perfect. What I have come to realize, especially in the last 3 years, is that the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the purpose is to allow someone like me who doesn't do well in the world to be able to walk through things that happen, that life happens, and to be able to walk through them and endure them with grace, dignity, and my head held high, and to not do all that damage that I used to do when I was drinking. You know, I had a certain idea when I first got sober of what my life was going to be like. And I thought I would, I was a young widow. I didn't have any children, and I wanted to be somebody's wife. I wanted to be somebody's mother. I wanted certain things, and I believed that if I just did all these things in Alcoholics Anonymous, that God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. And so eventually I'd get all that stuff, you know, and I'd get the husband, and I'd have the perfect children, and someday I'd get to hold my own grandbabies, and that would be my life. And that's not what life has turned out for me. That's exactly not what I have. You know, instead, what I have learned is the life journey that I have taken has been one that is rich and full and nothing like I expected. You know, Kenny got to go on in his life. This was somebody who should never have gotten out of a penitentiary, who should have just spent the rest of his life drinking and getting arrested, drinking and getting arrested. And instead, today, he's one of the top engineers in an industry that sends him all over the world. And he got to go on that journey after I had been with him and sober for about a year. And he pointed me in the direction of the women of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started working with, you know, women sponsors. And when I was about, well, it was 20 years ago. So when I was not quite 11 years sober, or not quite 12 years sober, the woman that I was working with had just a huge upset in her life. Just her whole life went cattywampus, and she fired a bunch of us. And she used those terms. I just have to get rid of you. I've got to fire these people. And I didn't have a sponsor for the first time. And I called the woman who was at the time my grand sponsor, the late Peg Martin. And I said, I don't know what to do. And Peg says, well, let's inventory that out for you, honey. I want you to write it out for me. Tell me what's going on. And I want you to fax it to me. And I did. I wrote an inventory out. I got permission from my boss at the time to fax it. I faxed it to Peg. She read it all. She called me that night and she said, you know, something, Les, it's time for you to find a new sponsor. And what has happened here is not your fault, but it's time for you to go find a new sponsor. And I said, well, would you be my sponsor? And she said, absolutely not. I'm in Nebraska. You're in California. I want you to find somebody there. You need someone there, honey. If under any other circumstance, I would have said yes. She goes, but you need someone there. And through the various things, I was given direction to call my present sponsor, Debbie D, out of Concord. And I called her, and Debbie explained to me how she sponsors. She says, first, we're going to work out of the big book in the 12 and 12. We're going to take the steps together one at a time. And I said, absolutely, I'm on it, Debbie. I haven't worked the steps for a while formally, so you betcha, I'm right there. She goes, and after we're done with that, we're going to look at that 12 and 12 again, and we are going to work those traditions. And the two of us are going to learn about those traditions and how to work them in your life and in your personal life and in AA. I said, you got it. I'm your girl. I'm a traditions monster. I'm on board. She said, and then what we're going to do is going to get the most recent service manual, and you and I are going to sit down and read it, and you're going to learn all about the concepts. And I thought, I have made a big mistake. What am I doing? Maybe she'll forget, you know, maybe she'll forget. Well, she didn't. And what I will tell you is that that woman has opened up a life for me by handing me all three legacies of Alcoholics Anonymous that has made my life something I never thought it would be. And for the last 20 years, she has guided me through all kinds of things, through the death of my father, where I had to end up giving a victim's impact statement at the trial of the young man that my dad got into a fist fight with and a knife fight at 3 a.m., you know, and down in front of in a street in Livermore, California. And then my father passed away before he could be there for the rest of the trial. Debbie guided me through how to do that victim's impact statement, where I was able to look at a young man that was there because he was drinking and say to him, you have a chance right now to turn your life around. Don't do what my father did. Turn your life around. And that kid showed up in a meeting and found me 2 years later and said, because of you, when I was in jail, I went to those H&I meetings, and I'm so grateful. She guided me through changes in my career because, you know, funny things happen when you stop drinking. You said you start showing up at work all the time. They start looking at you and saying, hey, this kid's pretty good. And I went from a beginning level clerk to somebody that was ended up into middle management with Contra Costa County. And one of the greatest jobs I got to have, my first big promotion, was into the sheriff's office. And I ended up being a part of law enforcement. And that doesn't happen for people like me. And I thought, well, I'll just try to be a good supervisor by not doing what all those bad supervisors I used to have did. And of course that didn't work. And I would be calling Debbie almost every day, leaving that office. I don't know what I'm going to do. This is not going to work. And she would guide me by using the concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous that I could take into the workplace. And I ended up having a very successful career in law enforcement for like 10 years. And my final job with Contra Costa County was a promotion where I headed up a unit that actually put into play what the rest of almost company knows as Obamacare, but we knew as the Affordable Care Act. And I was the person in charge of implementing that for all the Medi-Cal recipients in California, in Northern California, in our county. And I would not have been able to do that without the principles and the concepts and the legacies given to me by Alcoholics Anonymous. And at 30 years, I was able to retire. And I retired with a successful career. I have a wonderful pension. I have excellent, healthcare. I've got all these things. She guided me through my next job, where I got to work for 5 years as the coordinator of children's catechesis for St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Modesto. And I remember my mother, because I was sharing a home with my mother at the time. And I remember my mother saying to me when I got that job, oh, honey, you were always so sad that you never met somebody to marry and you never had your own children. She goes, and now you have 600 and you don't have to send any of them to college. And I said, that's right, yay. And I got to do that for 5 years and it was so much fun. And she guided me through the death of my mother. In 2020, when the world went cattywampus, I was sharing this home that I live in now with my mom. And my mother was 98 and a half years old. And she had, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, because of what you taught me, how to be of service to people in my family, she and I were really close. She was my biggest supporter. And on my sobriety birthday that year, she figured out how to get one of my girls to smuggle her in a birthday card for me. And that morning on May 4th was a card waiting from my mother. And it was, to congratulate me on, at that time, 28 years of continuous sobriety. And when my mom came out for breakfast, I said, Mom, thank you so much for my birthday card. And my mother said, thank you for 28 years of peace. And by the end of that month, my mother had suffered a catastrophic stroke. And both me and my brother were able to be there with her during her last days here at the home. And we were here when she passed. And you guys taught me how to do that, to again, walk through that with grace and dignity. And now it's just me and my brother, right? And his children. And my brother and I, we share the same birthday. We were always really close. But at the death of my mother, my brother started having some kind of strange behavior. And again, Alcoholics Anonymous helped me with that. We honest to God thought, my sponsor and I honest to God thought that maybe he was just upset because I had been put in charge of the family trust and he wasn't. But his behavior became stranger and stranger over the last 3 years. And in February of last year, I had to make a decision. My sponsor helped me make a decision where I had to say to my brother, you are no longer allowed to contact me. You have to contact me through our attorney. You cannot talk to me directly, because his behavior had become so angry and violent and mean. And I kept thinking it was me. I kept looking with Debbie, what am I doing wrong? How am I not approaching this right? How am I not applying the principles? And about in November, I got a phone call from his son, Ryan, and he said, Auntie, says my dad's been admitted to the hospital. He has stage 4 colon cancer and it's spread to his liver and his spine. But it also had been something else. He had also developed cirrhosis of the liver. And apparently all of this had started to develop shortly after my mother's death. And for those of you who aren't aware, when you start having this kind of attack on your liver, the lactic acid affects the way you see things in your brain. It really affects it. And I did what I was taught to do by AA. I went to the hospital and I took my brother's hand and he looked at me and he said, Sissy, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's been wrong with me. And I told him, I'm right here. And it was 6 weeks from the moment of his diagnosis. And on December 23rd, my brother, I was there and I got to walk my brother home. And on December 26th was the first time in 62 years that I celebrated my birthday all by myself. And you people have taught me how to do that. You taught me how to walk through that with grace and with dignity and my head held high. And you know, losing a sibling is so different. When I lost my parents, there was a natural order to things. The child is supposed to honor and bury their parents and then honor their memory. But losing my baby brother has been really tough. And I thought, it's okay. I'll be able to handle this. I will follow the directions given to me by my sponsor. I will stay close to Alcoholics Anonymous. And in January, around January 10th, I started getting these weird pains in my side and my back. And I thought, oh, I don't know what's going on. I probably ate too many cauliflower or something. And I went to a conference that I'd been booked to speak at, and I spoke at the conference, and the pain kept getting worse. And I was asked to speak at a Zoom meeting on a Thursday. And I spoke at that meeting, and I started noticing I couldn't get a breath. And by that night, I was in an ambulance on my way to the hospital, and I was diagnosed with pneumonia. And I didn't know pneumonia hurt. I never had any idea about that. And so I have been dealing with pneumonia since that day. And what was it, yesterday? Yeah, I went yesterday for the follow-up CAT scan, and this is supposed to be the one that would release me back into the world, and I'd get to go outside again and blah, blah, blah. And the pneumonia hasn't left me. In fact, it's come back. And so I'm being sent to a specialist next week. And you know what? That was yesterday. This morning was my call with my sponsor. And she said, how are you doing? And I said, I'm discouraged. I'm scared. I'm a little bit angry. But I'm okay because I'm sober. I have a meeting that I'm supposed to chair at 7 a.m. I have sponsees that I'm working with today. I have my dogs. I have a place to live. And I'm going to be okay. And my sponsor gave me some direction around this. My sponsor gave me some direction about prayer and about a little bit of inventory about what's really frightening me about this. And I'm going to follow those directions. And I share this with you not because I want to say, look how brave and wonderful I am. I'm sharing this with you because if there's anybody here tonight that has not been sober as long as I have, that has made the mistake of thinking that if you have long-term sobriety, your life is just wonderful and you skip down the road of happy destiny and everything goes well and you never get scared and you never get worried and you never think to yourself, whose idea was this? Or I didn't sign up for this. You're wrong. What allows me to walk through things like the death of my brother, being diagnosed with pneumonia, having to work through all of the things that come with death and the paperwork and the this and the that, all of that stuff, what allows me to do that is what you people have taught me the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and the 12 concepts of Alcoholics Anonymous. All three legacies of this magnificent program that we have allows for someone like me, who is a garden variety drunk, who of herself and by herself is only able to be a commode hugging drunk. And because of people like you, the program of AA, and the fact that you kept saying to me, keep coming back, and I did, you've allowed me to walk through some stuff that I never thought someone like me would ever walk through. When people say to me, are you happy with your life? I'm going to tell you something. My life may not be what I wanted it to be when I was 1 or 2 years sober, but my life today is second to none. And that is a direct result of the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank Stephen for inviting me here today. And I want to thank you all for being so patient and listening to me. And most of all, I want to thank you all for my life, because without you, I wouldn't be sitting here, sober, fully dressed, and in my right mind. Thank you for letting me share.